Hey everyone. All right, so this is the first part Monday lesson for this week's unit. And this week we are going to cover from colonies to the start of the American Revolution. So, what kicks off the American Revolution? I put on the tag in the front that you see right there, from colonies to a country. So, what is the feel in the colonies before we led up to the American Revolution, and what's the tipping point? We've been colonies now for close to almost 200 years. What is going to make the colonists finally say enough and declare the American Revolution in 1776? So that is our goal. So you know how we get from a colony to, or a group of colonies, 13 colonies, to a country. Okay, so the start of colonial protest. All right. So the first thing that we have to know is leading up to the big event that happens before the Revolutionary War is the French and Indian War. Leading up to that event, leading up to the French and Indian War, are three other wars. Altogether, we call these the four imperial wars. Okay. Now notice that word imperial, empire. These are all wars that are fought by Great Britain. Okay, from 1689 to 1763. In all of these wars, Great Britain, France, and Spain, in some capacity, are fighting each other over colonial land. So they are not fighting each other over land in Europe. They're fighting each other over land over here in North America. They're fighting over land in India as well. So they're fighting in multiple locations over colonial land. There's King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, and then the French and Indian War. You do not have to know details about King William's War, or Queen Anne's War unless you go on to college and become a history major. But for our purposes, you don't have to know anything about them, just that they happened. King George's War, I do want you to know that this war really ticks off the colonists because the colonists help fight this war. The American colonists help fight this war. And they took a fort from France. Remember how we talked about France has all these forts that they like for fur trading? And the American colonists won this fort by fighting the French. And as soon as the war was over, England gave the fort back to France. And that really, really ticked off the New England colonists and made them think that once again, the King of England did not have their back. And then enter the last of the four imperial wars, the French and Indian War. Now, this is also called the 7 Years' War in Europe, but the part of what happens in the colonies is called the French and Indian War. Okay. This war, because it happens in two locations, it cost a lot of money. Because not only is England sending troops to fight to locations in Europe, the 7 Years' War portion, which is tied with Austria and Prussia, they are also putting a huge number of British troops on boats to come over to the colonies to fight the French forces who have teamed up with Native Americans. So let's talk about this war in specifics and try to figure out why the French and Indian War happened in the first place. The French and Indian War happened because if you look at this map, this territory that is striped is disputed. It is in between English territory and French territory. The English want it, the French want it, and the Native Americans are living on it. Okay? The Native Americans and the French team up together to stop Britain and the American colonists from expanding any more into this striped territory. This striped territory is the Ohio River Valley. Remember that because that term is going to come up 100 times over the next 5 minutes. The Ohio River Valley is disputed. Once again, the French want it, the Native Americans are living on it, and the American colonists want to settle there. They want to push out and use that territory. When this dispute starts with a couple little skirmishes between Native Americans, British, and French, a meeting is called. A meeting is called in Albany, New York, and is organized by this guy, the inventor of the bifocal, Benjamin Franklin. And he comes together with an idea that says, look, in order for this to work, all of the colonies have to band together, fight together, raise money together to fight against the French. And if you've ever seen this cartoon, Join or Die, that is what that is representing. Why the Albany Plan of Union is important is because it shows us that the British already knew that this was a very, very important war, the French and Indian War. And so they wanted delegates from every single colony to meet together to discuss how this war was going to be fought in the colonies. In the Albany Plan of Union, Benjamin Franklin wanted every single colony to give up a representative to have an intercolonial government. Instead of everybody being independent and separate, the idea of having one unified colonial government. He wanted to make a system to recruit troops, and he also wanted to collect taxes. Now, please know, this does, and move me so you can see, this does not go over well. This is not accepted by the colonies because they do not want to have a higher government power. They want to have their local colonial governments, and they also don't want to pay taxes to a colonial government. So it fails. Only reason why we still talk about it, because it failed, is that it sets the stage for cooperation among all of the colonies later. Okay, and nobody knows where this cartoon comes from. So please know that this cartoon came from before the French and Indian War. This cartoon is not from the American Revolution, and that drives me nuts that people think this cartoon's from the American Revolution. It is not. It is from before the American Revolution. It is from before the French and Indian War kicks off. It's the Albany Plan of Union. But this cartoon is referenced a lot with the American Revolution, the concept that, we all need to come together in order to survive. Okay? All right, so that's your Albany Plan of Union. Okay, so the French and Indian War. We're not going to go over the details of what happens in the war and the individual battles and all of that stuff. Once again, if you become a history major, you can hound in all of those amazing, wonderful details. What you need to know about the French and Indian War is that Great Britain won. Great Britain, along with the help of the colonists, defeated the French and defeated the Native Americans. Okay, because they won, Great Britain becomes the largest landholder in the entire world. They get Canada, they get Florida, which used to belong to Spain. I know Spain wasn't a part of it, but they really were. But once again, if you need the details, you can read about them. And the concept that colonists technically have access to all of the land right here up to the Mississippi River. Technically now they have access to all of this land. So who's happy about the victory of the French and Indian War? The American colonists are, because they have more land that they can settle on now. So here are the effects of the French and Indian War. The positive, the colonists did not have regular attacks from Native Americans, French, or Spanish over settled land anymore. The negative, salutary neglect is over because Britain is broke. In our last unit, we hounded that term, salutary neglect. That meant nice neglect. That's when the King of England left the colonists alone pretty much to do whatever they wanted as long as he was making money off the colonies. Well, now that is done, and there are going to be strict rules and strict laws enforced on those colonists, and they are not going to be happy about it. You are probably familiar with the rules that we're going to talk about because a lot of them are acts to raise tax money because Britain's broke after this war. Now, the other thing that really ticks off the colonists, and move myself again here, that really ticks off the colonists is, remember all of that land that technically now the colonists were supposed to have access to? Well, all of a sudden, they don't. That land, there is a lot of Native American populations that live on it. And to appease the Native American populations and prevent them from having any more future costly wars, the Crown, the King of England, declares that the colonists can't settle on it. In 1763, Chief Pontiac led attacks in that Ohio River Valley, that disputed territory that caused the French and Indian War in the first place. He led attacks in that area from New York to Virginia, okay, on the outskirts. The natives were angry over Britain's growing westward movement, and there was no attempt whatsoever to bribe the Native Americans or gift the Native Americans for the land that Britain was taking. And the French used to bribe them and say, hey, we're moving on your land, but here's some gifts. So the British sent royal troops to deal with this rebellion, not colonial troops. They sent British troops, not colonial troops. During the French and Indian War, the British did not respect colonial troops because they thought they were a ragtag group of morons. Okay, so because of this Pontiac's Rebellion, which was Native American attacks on British American colonists, the Crown declares the Proclamation of 1763 that says, hey, I know we just fought a war where technically we won all the land to the Mississippi River, and we told you colonists that you were going to get that land and you could go settle on that land, but actually, no, you can't. You cannot go past the Appalachian Mountains in order to keep peace with the Native Americans and to not tie up royal troops in these fights and to not spend any more money. We're going to draw a line, which is the red line that you see right here. It's called the Proclamation of 1763, and you cannot cross that line. Guess what a lot of colonists do anyway? They cross that line and they go settle and they get in fights with the Native American population that is there. And when the king is mad about that, it's going to help lead to the Revolutionary War. So, the big fact I want to leave you with today. Here's your King George III of England. King George III of England is now broke. He is broke because of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War tied up a lot of British money. And then now on top of that, Pontiac's Rebellion after the French and Indian War cost him money too, because he doesn't want to have to send more royal soldiers over to fight the Native Americans over land that technically should belong to the colonists after the French and Indian War. So King George wants money, and guess who he wants it from? The people who are costing him the money, which are the 13 colonies. So he is going to start charging them taxes to raise money for what he sees as problems that they created. And that is where we will pick up tomorrow. Good job.